us to discuss matters that are of critical interest to our residents and our communities. Today, we're blessed to have State Senator Josh Newman joining us. And also online from the city of Los Alamitos will be Mayor Mark Churko. And joining us here in the webinar will be from the city of Seal Beach, Mayor Joe Kalmick. All right, Senator Josh Newman as a Yale graduate. He has an extensive career in the military and then in politics, first elected to the state Senate for the 29th Senatorial District of California in 1916, re-elected in 2020. You will have many committee assignments and you're going to talk a little bit about some of those. And so we just really appreciate you coming and taking some time to join us today. I know your time is very important. But our residents are really looking forward to hearing what you have to tell us about the district, what you're focusing on, what we can expect going forward. So please, if you give us a little overview of what you're working on, we appreciate it.
Thank you, Mayor Pete. So it's a pleasure to be with you from Sacramento on a beautiful sunny day here in Sacramento. And Mayor Kalmick, Mayor Churko, nice to see you. I'm grateful for the invitation, and I am proud to serve the 29th Senate District, which includes, obviously, the city of Cypress. And so, as Mayor Pete mentioned, I am on a number of committees, the most important of which, I think, for this conversation is I am the chair of something called the State Senate Special Committee on Pandemic Emergency Response. And in that capacity, there's sort of a dual track. On the one hand, we've held a series of hearings about particular issues or sectors that have been most impacted by the pandemic. Our next public hearing will be about the restaurant industry and how badly it has been affected, and sort of the sort of natural and necessary steps that we need to make to revitalize that critical sector. And the other role that I play on a weekly basis, probably more important, is I lead every Monday a joint legislative meeting with the governor's key staff about issues and challenges relating to the pandemic. As a result, I've had kind of an interesting vantage point from which to both sort of observe and learn about the pandemic as we move forward, but I'd like to also think we've had a positive impact in bringing to the administration a number of issues, particularly issues about access, COVID testing, issues around protocols that have affected businesses, among them restaurants, but many others. And now we're in a phase where we're talking about vaccines and about how best to get Californians, especially in our district, get everybody vaccinated as quickly as possible. So glad to be here. Mayor, you're going to moderate the conversation, but I'm very interested in getting feedback from constituents about how you've been impacted in ways that my office can best serve you as we move forward.
Thank you. Mayor Kalmick, would you please take the first question?
Sure. Again, thank you, Senator, for joining us today. We really enjoy these opportunities. As chairman of the Pandemic Response Select Committee, could you give us a little tighter overview of the committee's purpose and the top 3 or 4 items that the committee is really focusing on?
I appreciate the question. So I am the second chair of the committee, having taken office in January. I was preceded by Senator Lena Gonzalez from Long Beach. And so our first hearing was about childcare, which is a sector which has had a really important role, and actually it says a lot about the pandemic. Working women have been everywhere, all working from home. And working women especially have been forced to take time off from their jobs as the pandemic created a whole bunch of challenges. And it's something, it has sort of cast a light on this very important issue for Californians. And so clearly we need to do better in the pandemic, and I think also beyond, in how we resource and plan so that working families have good, reliable, affordable opportunities for their childcare, so that both members of the family, if they work, can do so while their children have a good, nurturing environment. So that was the first hearing we held. Moving forward, as I mentioned, the next hearing is going to be about the restaurant and hospitality sector. And then moving forward, and I think as everybody's aware, we're in a phase hopefully where people are more optimistic. I think the governor's phrase today was the light at the end of the tunnel is getting brighter, and I hope that's true. But the 2 next steps I think are really important for my committee are to have smart conversations first about how we recover from the pandemic. And I think it's important to note that the pandemic has not, and the recession it has caused, have not been equal across the board. So at sort of the top of the income scale, many people have been largely unscathed. Those folks who can work digitally, who can work from home, have had more or less normal work experiences, and those businesses have done quite well. But other businesses that depend on foot traffic, other workers that don't have the option of working remotely, have been really substantially impacted. And so at the bottom of the wage scale, we've had working families that are absolutely decimated, who are behind on rent, who have had problems finding work during the pandemic, and all the stresses that those create. So the next committee meeting I'll have after that is about how we recover, how we do that smartly, and most importantly, how we take care of those who've been most impacted by the pandemic and its recession. And then my obligation, I believe, as the chair of this committee, as we hopefully move out of this public health emergency, is to ensure to the maximum extent possible that California and our area are never caught as off guard by an equivalent public health emergency or any kind of economic cataclysm such as this. Because if we're honest, it is absolutely true that we were completely unprepared in March of last year when the situation became severe. But we had 3-4 months to plan. The state did not do that very well. And I'd like to make sure that we're not in that position ever again.
Great. Thank you.
All right, Senator, if, as you mentioned, reopening is the state as quickly as possible is essential. And so just wondered if you could tell us what the state is doing to help us open, what's your plan? I know you're going to have some hearings, but can you share with us what the state's doing and perhaps give us some insights on the governor's recent announcements about reopening?
No, so I'll start there. So the news for the most part is good, especially relative to where we've been. And so the combination of vaccine distribution, penetration, over 20 million Californians at this point have received at least one vaccination. Actually, no, let me correct myself. There have been 20 million shots given so far. So we're getting to a much higher proportion of Californians who've gotten either one or both of their vaccines. There are 3 vaccines. 2 of them require 2 shots. One, the J&J vaccine, only require 1. But we're working steadily as we sort of work through these probably unnecessarily complicated tiers. But at this point, California's over 65, close to 75% of that population has been vaccinated. That 75% number is an important threshold. That's the sort of the scientific threshold for what is characterized as herd immunity, which essentially means that if you can get a large enough share of the population immunized, you can effectively block the pathways for the transmission of a particular pathogen or disease. We've done that well with other diseases. This has been the burden and the goal around this very new disease, the coronavirus. And so as we work our way down into the larger kind of more extensive population, the goal is to get as quickly as possible to that herd immunity threshold because, one, it's necessary, right, to give us the assurance that we can start to reopen. 2, and probably more importantly, folks are probably aware that there are variants of the coronavirus that have become identified, some from the UK. That's now the most common strain in the US. It's made its way over here. That is a more virulent strain, but it's not necessarily as, it's not fatal, nor is it vaccine resistant. But the fear is if we're not quick and efficient about getting folks vaccinated, that we will find ourselves in facing other strains of the vaccine of the coronavirus that may be vaccine resistant. And if that were allowed to happen, it would obviously prolong the pandemic in ways that none of us want to see. And so that's where we are sort of scientifically on the public health side. Economically, as I mentioned, the pandemic has affected different groups differently. At the state level, we're actually quite lucky. When the pandemic started, we were anticipating a massive recession, and as a result, a huge kind of fiscal impact on the state's finances. That has actually not happened. The state is actually in a very good position fiscally. The state is, in fact, probably in a better position, ironically, than it has been in probably decades, all things considered, because not only have tax receipts been good at the state level, the federal government is sending the state more money. My job is to make sure that money is spent well. And so there's a bunch of different areas that hopefully we're going to make smart investments. And so we'll start with the most sort of important things. One, as I mentioned, assistance with rent arrearages. Very large number of people are behind on their bills for reasons completely out of their control. Not only are they impacted, but the folks who own the rental properties they live in are equally impacted because they have their own bills to pay, mortgages to pay. And so there are state funds that will be available for that. There are state funds that are available, and more will be available for helping businesses recover, for helping nonprofits that do important work recover from some of the impacts that they've seen. And then as we move forward, we're looking at making target investments in some of the areas I've already touched on: childcare, education, workforce development. As people move back into the economy, we're expecting a fairly robust recovery, but not all jobs will come back. Some of the changes that have been sort of caused by the pandemic will be permanent. So we need to make sure that people, as they look for their next wage earning opportunity, have good opportunities and good resources to do that. And so, long-winded answer, John, but there's a whole slew of areas that we're going to be focused on. And again, thankfully, I think the state's in a relatively good position to provide funds for those things.
Great, thank you.
Just as a short follow-up, how is California doing compared to the other states in both the vaccination rates and how are we doing in terms of acceptance of the vaccine? Are we seeing that there is less resistance than initially?
That is a good question. Let me start with the vaccine acceptance first, Mayor. The incentive to get out of this pandemic has actually provided, I think, food for thought for many people who otherwise might have been hesitant. So we've been pleasantly surprised over the last 30, 60 days. Attitudes have changed in I think an encouraging way from my standpoint, where vaccine hesitancy has actually gone down. And as you can gather, to get to the herd immunity threshold, you need 75%, the vast majority of Californians, to be, to embrace the opportunity to be vaccinated. The initial polling, as I think you indicate, was actually not encouraging. And so what we've seen, both through the incentives, right? People would really love to get out of this. We'd love to all stop wearing face masks and return to our normal lives. But we've also got, I think, the benefit of the word of mouth, where people have now been vaccinated. I've gotten my first vaccine. I'm glad I've gotten it. It was actually a completely pleasant experience. The side effects were minimal, other than a little bit arm soreness, and so that's encouraging. So so we're seeing increasing uptake. The attitude is actually positive. With respect to the actual numbers, California is actually doing quite well. If California were its own country, we now have more people vaccinated than Germany or France. I think we can be proud of that. We've got a huge population of 40 million people. But we are not only making good progress now, but we're also encouraged that the federal allocations of vaccines are increasing steadily. And at the local level, the County of Orange has actually done a very good job in developing a vaccine program that they can now implement. They have 3 different mass vaccination sites right now. And so if you go on to myturn.com, if you haven't already, it's not that hard to get an appointment, and you're likely to get an appointment within the next couple of weeks, and then to be vaccinated first and second within 3 weeks after that. And then from there, we're looking at, to my mind, an optimistic path. And then, sometime, I think as Mayor Pete mentioned, the governor announced that as of June 15th, if the numbers keep moving in our direction, we should be able to abandon completely this very complicated system of county tiers. Masks will still be necessary for some time, but businesses will be allowed to reopen. You and I can go out and eat in restaurants again, go to movies, go to other public events, and that will be a welcome change.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I know our community is really clamoring to get back to be able to enjoy some of the things that make it a community. Well, you answered our next question, so I'm going to jump to question 5, and we talked a little bit in the warm up about reopening schools. That's a critical item for us, and up to this point, school districts have been making individual decisions on what's right for them. Do you envision the state through the State Department of Education or any agency getting involved in helping schools make a decision to open, or will that remain a local decision?
So I think, Mayor, schools are mostly subject to local control, local decision making. The state's role in this is to do two things. One is kind of that classic do no harm concept, which is make sure that there aren't obstacles in the way of opening schools, and I think we've made some progress there. Secondly, providing resources, right? So as schools open up, as you're probably aware, all Californians 16 and over at this point are eligible at some point to be vaccinated, but we do not yet have the what they call the emergency authorization approval for any vaccine for children under 16. Although there are some clinical trials going on, it's not yet realistic to get students vaccinated, and so we're going to have to make sure that we both provide safe environments for those students, and then maximum testing, so that as we move forward, we can make sure that those schools are safe. There are new protocols that make it easier. That classic 6 feet of social distancing, because of CDC research and guidelines, has now been compressed to 3 feet. So it's totally realistic to get students back in school. And so at the state level, our role is to make sure that we help local school districts work through any issues they have, as they provide the leadership to do something which is sorely needed, which is to get students back into classrooms.
Great, thank you.
Again, with regard to education, we've if and when we open, and it looks like, of course, we are opening, how are we going to address the problem of a disparity between those school districts and schools where the learning has been hybrid, the learning has been entirely at home, and schools that have been opened? I mean, you're going to have kind of a mismatch of the flow of education in our young people.
So, Mayor, I'm not sure I have a good, concise answer to that question, except that it is clearly a challenge. And so, California has over 1,000 school districts, and to your point, they haven't all had the same experience. And an extenuating factor is income levels, right? The conditions and circumstances of families and students. So one thing that the state is doing is going to emphasize moving forward is solving internet connectivity to make sure that as many families, as much of California has broadband access as possible, because that has been a huge obstacle for certain families. We've all heard the stories of children sitting in cars in the parking lot of their school or even Starbucks in order to access online learning, which is has been really unfortunate. But as we move back into hopefully in-person learning at sort of the normal environment, we're going to have to be really deliberate about accounting for differences in achievement, and also I would add, so the lasting social impacts, some of the trauma that probably has adhered to students over 12 months of real uncertainty. And all of that is going to be very complicated. So unfortunately, we're moving toward the summer. And many school districts have to make decisions about, how to staff and resource for summer learning to make up for all that lost time. And so, again, my office is looking to be a resource for that. Hopefully, the state is supportive, but most of that work is going to have to take place at the school district level.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Moving over to something that's a little more fun, sports. We're seeing local youth sports leagues, high school sports, college sports, and professional sports reopening. And do you think under the new guidelines, when we get to the right point, that we'll be able to have a more full attendance at our events and fuller participation?
So I know I'm a huge sports fan. I know, Mayor Pete, you're a baseball coach, and so I know you and I are on the same page. The answer is yes. It's just a matter of how fast, and a lot of that is again contingent on maintaining the progress that the state has made at especially at the county level. But we've got fans back in Dodger Stadium, we've got fans back in Angel Stadium. That's nice to see, and to me it's wonderful to see scholastic sports teams in a position to once again take the field, right? Because that has probably been one of the hardest aspects of the pandemic, especially for young people that use sports as an outlet, as a pathway toward college. So, it's wonderful to see that again. And we all aspire to something more like normalcy in the old days, but I think we're headed in that direction. And I think, that path will accelerate over the next 3 months.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. And fortunately, UCLA is also headed in that direction as a student during the wooden era.
And so my condolences. I will say it. I don't want to waste too much time. That was an awesome game until those last 3 seconds.
Heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But I think there's some optimism there in terms of UCLA coming back into prominence.
Yeah, that was great.
We've seen a lot of media coverage lately related to the EDD, the unemployment agency. Can you give us some idea of what's going on there and what we can do possibly, if there are any ideas to kind of get rid of the backlog and kind of straighten things out there?
That is a good question, and the answer is not simple. But let me I think agree with the premise. So EDD, the Employment Development Department, is the resource that Californians depend on for unemployment insurance. And in the beginning of the pandemic, the impact was, as I mentioned, it was huge. So many Californians lost their income earning opportunities. The federal government, through the first CARES Act, made allowances for even those people who are working freelance for the first time to receive unemployment compensation. And then the state was completely unprepared to administer these programs at a sufficient scale to meet the need. And so one thing I think we've learned, and again, applying it moving forward, is you need to have that capacity in reserve at EDD for even a mild recession. This was something much larger. The other thing that happened was, many folks know, there was just a massive amount of fraud that took place where criminal gangs, apparently from all over the world, who have access to people's personally identifiable information, beat a whole bunch of California to the tune of millions of people to the unemployment office, either online, and received the compensation that was otherwise due them to the tune of billions of dollars. And so, thankfully, for whatever it's worth, most of that money is guaranteed by the federal government, but some of it is state money that we're going to have to find over time. And through all of that, Californians had so much trouble connecting to somebody either online or on the phone to process their claims. My office is still working through a very substantial backlog, as I think most Senate and Assembly offices are. We're there to serve anybody, so feel free to contact us if you have an unemployment problem. I'll give you my email. It's josh.newman@sen.ca.gov. You feel free to email me, and I'll connect you to a member of my staff. It's again josh.newman@sen for Senate.ca.gov. And we'll connect you. And so I have a very capable staff that's working very deliberately to try and help people with both their unemployment backlogs, but in parallel, Mayor, as you may be aware, there was, because of the fraud, there were a bunch of sort of automatic fraud alerts that were put in place. So many people did get, through Bank of America was the servicing bank, got debit cards they were supposed to use. Many of those debit cards were blocked as a result of fraud alerts. And so we're also working with our constituents to try and get those blocks removed. I will say the situation is better than it was a month ago, 45 days ago, but there's still plenty of work to do.
Thanks for that.
All right. Thank you. Senator, we'd like to just transition now to a discussion about the regional housing needs assessment. And, all of the cities were updating our housing element plans. The state has required that cities plan for significant increases in the number of units within each city. And so we're wondering, there's concern in the community about some of the impacts that will be traffic, parking, that sort of stuff. So I was wondering two parts. Could you give us some guidance about the state's, the reasoning, the rationale for the state wanting to plan for so much additional housing, and then any guidance you could give to cities that might be struggling with how to plan for this growth.
Right. So this is something I think Mayor Pete, you and I have talked about in the past. So on the one hand, California has, there's an obvious need given sort of the growth in population over the last several decades, but also the limitations on development. And so we have a mismatch between supply and demand in real estate. Median home prices in Orange County are astoundingly high, somewhere on the order of $600,000. And so clearly we need to create more supply to meet this demand that has chased prices up so high. And so that's kind of obvious. How you do that, not obvious by any means. Since 1970, there has been a process in place, and you referred to it within something called the housing element. There's a cycle every 6 years. There's something called the regional housing needs assessment, where ostensibly we deliberately look at what's the need across the state. How does that break down by region? How does that break down by city? And you can assign kind of scientifically how much housing you would need to meet the rise in population and the increase in demand. So that's kind of the easy part. The hard part is how we prescribe that, how you do that. And I'm not sure the state has figured that out. And so so anybody who works on a city council is faced by this very challenge of you get a state number as part of this RENA cycle that says, Cypress, you're on the hook to create, say, 2,000 units of housing across, affordable market rate and otherwise. But we don't tell you how to do it, and we certainly haven't helped you do that. And it's not simple at all. And even as we've made these kinds of rules, the state has made it progressively harder for developers to actually build housing at an affordable price because of regulations. And at the local level, you have zoning that makes it difficult to identify where you would find land that is easily developed at a price that lets somebody building a home sell it at a price that somebody can afford. I don't have a simple answer, except that I think that there's this phrase attributed to Albert Einstein, which is, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. So there's some legislation kind of moving in Sacramento that would supersede local jurisdictions' zoning authority. I don't know that I support that. I think that cities are the best positioned to determine how they use their land, how they meet the needs and concerns of their residents. But we do need to figure out some smarter ways to develop housing that people can afford, because we run the risk in California, among other things. This is, it's a hard state. It's an expensive state, of pricing the next several generations out of the opportunity for home ownership. And that would not only be unfortunate, it actually means that we're probably going to lose the benefit of a lot of talented people that will go elsewhere to find their dreams.
Yeah, thank you. I know that's one of the concerns that we've had is we're talking about building housing for young families, young couples to be able to get started, where 30 years ago it was much more affordable for us to get started. So
honestly, I think that's an understatement, right? I mean, when you look at the cost of housing has so far exceeded the rate of inflation that it's kind of stunning. And so I have so much sympathy for a young person coming out of college, about to get married. The prospect of owning a home, especially where they're from, where they want to live, is really daunting at this point. There is one sort of legislative initiative that I think is actually quite encouraging. And the idea is to create kind of a state resource, a bank, where if you couldn't afford the full cost of a new home, this state corporation that would take investors would act as your partner. And so you might own 55% of a property with this entity picking up the remainder. And then as the property appreciated, if and when it came time to sell, you'd see the return on your share of the investment. And hopefully we can do, by doing so, we can create more ownership opportunities for young people.
Great. If I might, before I go into my next question, I just want to tag on to this discussion the additional burden that the coastal cities in California have, because on one side of the coin, we have the state, mandating the RENA numbers and SB 9, that in a sense would take away our local control of how many units can be built on a particular lot. But in addition to that, we have the California Coastal Commission, which is disallowing lot splits, which is working against the idea of being able to build higher density. They basically want us to abandon and retreat today, even though the alleged sea level rise that will start taking out our physical community is a 0.5% in 50 years. It's really putting the coastal cities in a bind. And we're hoping there is apparently a new SB1 this term that would try and, in a sense, create a collaborative effort between the Coastal Commission and the state government to be able to kind of look at those problems. So I just want to make that pitch, and if you happen to be involved in any of those discussions, to keep that in mind for us. With regard to the proof of vaccination issue, we've heard there's discussion, on the national level about the potential for what are called vaccine passports, or proof of vaccination, in order to be able to, for people to be able to participate in certain activities. Do we know what the state of California is considering doing in terms of that without, infringing on people's freedoms and liberty?
So what we know, Mayor, as of this past Monday and through the weekly call we had, where I actually asked that question about vaccine passports, is we know that the state has not come to a decision yet. The state does not yet have even sort of the broad dimensions of a program for that. And I think the hope at the moment is that we can kind of expedite progress through the pandemic, and if we can get folks vaccinated quickly enough, that may preempt the need for something like a vaccine passport. And so at the moment, the state hasn't made any firm decisions as to how to approach that. Because to your point, we need to be deferential toward these issues of privacy and personal choice. Having said that, it may be true that entities like airlines or sports stadiums may find themselves in a position where it benefits everybody to ask for proof of vaccination, because to part of the conversation we had earlier, that might allow for greater participation and larger crowds at sort of public events that might allow for easier transit through things like airports. But the state has yet to come up with a policy or a program framework for that. And it's something that we'll keep discussing, and I'll keep pushing on to make sure that there's clarity.
Thank you.
All right, Senator, going back a little bit to the discussion we've had on resources, we know there's going to be a lot of resources flowing down from the federal government and then some resources on the state. Will the federal government resources be flowing directly to the counties and cities, or will they be flowing through the states, or kind of a combination?
All right, so Mayor, I think it's going to be a combination, and so that, it's sort of proportional. But you've got, sort of the CARES Act, and the CARES Act 2, which I think they call the HEROES Act. A bunch of money that will come directly to cities, and cities like yours will hopefully get your proportional share or better. And you will have complete discretion as to how to spend that money, within whatever the federal standard is. And then there will be state money, and again, it is really significant. And we're in a position where we're, again, far better off than anybody thought we would be at this point in this fiscal year, but looking toward next fiscal year. So my role, again, as a state senator, is to make sure that we spend that money smartly, and that we do that in full collaboration with the county and with local jurisdictions, so that we meet your needs and that we listen to your needs as the state makes plans for its share of those resources.
So just following up on that, what would be the best way for cities to engage with your office to understand and know the resources that are going to become available? So glad to work directly. I think you and I had a call recently with your city manager. That's probably the best way to do it. And as far as constituents here, again, always interested in feedback, always interested in ideas, but always glad to make myself available to talk directly with city manager
and as many members of the council, kind of within Brown Act,
Sure.
as we can do, so that I'm as well educated and kind of well apprised to do that well.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
We know that as a state senator that you're on several committees, not all of which are related to the pandemic and so forth. Could you give us a kind of an idea of what you've been working on through your other committee assignments and some of the things that are happening in Sacramento?
Absolutely. And so I am pulling up, I need to keep a spreadsheet, Mayor, I'm not even kidding, of all the committees that I'm on. I'm going to tell you what they are, and forgive me because it's a relatively long list. So I'm on 8 different committees in a select committee, and another thing. I'll get to that in a second. So I'm on the Senate Business Professions and Economic Development Committee. I'm on the Senate Budget and Fiscal Review Committee. There is a subcommittee of that committee. It's called Budget Subcommittee number 5. And it looks at the Corrections Department, Public Safety, Judiciary, Labor, and Transportation funding. I'm on the Elections and Constitutional Amendments Committee. I'm on something called the Joint Legislative Committee on Emergency Management. I am on the Labor, Public Employment, and Retirement Committee. I am on the Military and Veterans Affairs Committee. I'm a proud veteran of the United States Army, so that's gratifying to me to be able to do that. I am on the Senate Transportation Committee, and as I mentioned, I am the chair of the Special Committee on Pandemic Emergency Response. And I am on the Select Committee on Hydrogen, which is apparently recently formed. And I'm also the Senate's representative to the California Transportation Commission, which has responsibility for dispersing literally billions of dollars for local road and other transit projects across the year. So on any given day, I'm pretty busy with committee hearings. Legislatively, I've got a package of bills that, I don't know how much time we have here, but I think they're all on my website. But they're all consistent with kind of my approach to government. They're pragmatic bills about fixing problems. A couple bills to fix problems that I think I've identified with the recall process. Other bills to make sure that pharmacists are allowed to do their work without being burdened by corporate incentives or other requirements, so they can focus on providing maximum care to their patients. Got a bill to hopefully make a better process for recycling batteries so they don't wind up in landfills. A series of things. I think my goal, my role is to make sure the government works and works smartly. And then against that, I have to participate in all these committees and listen to my colleagues' legislation, and the flow of legislation in California is pretty amazing, right? So at the moment, there's over 700 bills that are moving through the state Senate, including very controversial bills, some of which I think you've already mentioned, like SB 9. And so, I try as best I can to be a voice of reason in those committees as we deliberate in those, and then to make smart votes on the floor of the Senate, hopefully in consultation with cities like yours, to make sure that I'm serving not just your constituents, but the needs of the city as well as I can.
All right. Well, Senator, you've addressed the last 2 questions that we had in your response there. So just wanted to see if you have any closing thoughts or remarks you'd like to make, and otherwise we greatly appreciate your time.
No, and I appreciate the invitation, Mayor Pete. And so I will say, Huntington Beach is not in my district. Los Alamitos is not in my district, but Cypress is. And I've always been so impressed at sort of the caliber and the commitment of the city council in Cypress, but also your city staff. I have 16 different cities in this state Senate district. California State Senate District is actually very large. It has more people in it than 6 states in the District of Columbia. Wow. And so Mayor Kalnick shook his head. I don't blame you. But I'm grateful to work with a city like Cypress. I think you're doing a wonderful job. It's a well-run city. It's a very civic-minded city. And so, I look forward to serving the city, getting to know your constituents better. And my door is always open. And so, don't feel, anybody on this Facebook Live, anybody in city government, feel free to call on us. I do want to emphasize one thing as we move forward. One of the things I'm most proud of my achievements over the last 4 years, I got funded in 2017 a 10-city task force that's working deliberately on solving the underlying problems of homelessness, youth violence, and then post-incarceration reentry, people coming back from prison. My biggest priority in this budget cycle is to get that 10-city task force, the North Orange County Public Safety Task Force, of which Cypress is a member, extended and expanded to include the city of Los Alamitos, the cities of Villa Park and Orange, all of the North Orange County Service Provision area, because I think we're making progress and it's done a wonderful job. I can't take credit for that. You've got chiefs of police and other organizations and city managers that are now working together across these, many cities to find better approaches to these very challenging issues, homelessness, and within that, mental health, substance abuse, youth gang violence. So I commend your staff on your support for that, and I look forward to working with everybody.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We greatly appreciate your time and look forward to working with you.
I just had one remark. Though you're not representing our city, I was most pleased to hear the one sentence that you said, and that's that you want to be the voice of reason. And I think that that was my goal in wanting to be elected to city council, and I would hope that more of our legislators at every level of government would embrace that philosophy. And I think we'd be much further ahead in so many of our endeavors.
And Mayor, let me add to that. So I do appreciate that. This to me is so refreshing. We've been talking about solving problems, and we haven't talked at all about politics. We haven't talked at all about party. That's as it should be. And so I take great pride in serving in Sacramento the whole of my district. I don't care what party you are. I don't know what your politics are. What we should be about at the state level, at the county level, at the state level is solving problems, making sure that families work hard in California. They give us their tax money. We should spend it in ways that benefit everybody.
Couldn't agree more.
Yes. So we want to thank Senator Newman for joining us today. For his expertise and willingness to listen and wanting to be the voice of reason. And I want to also let folks know that our next town hall will be April 21st during the lunch hour, and will feature our Assemblywoman Sharon Quirk Silva. With so much going on, I think that we hope that these town hall meetings will increase in their value, and people will want to participate and hear directly from our legislators, and we appreciate the opportunity for that. So thank you.
Thank you, mayors, for having me, and thank you everybody who participated.
All right.
Hey.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye, everyone.